Hey guys, welcome to the Liberal Hive Mind, a channel solely focused on exposing the abundant hypocrisy of the left. Now, ever since Joe Biden presented his first spending package, I've described mostly what he and the Democrats have been doing as fiscal insanity. Well, honestly, that may have been a little bit of a stretch. You know, it's like a rating system out of 10. You can't just give someone a 10 who's truly a 6 or a 7, because then it screws up the whole system. I mean, 10 is supposed to be reserved for basically near perfection, if not actual perfection. 10 out of 10. Maybe I should have saved the term fiscal insanity for something that was legitimately, completely fiscally insane. Joe Biden's plans, of course, are totally irresponsible and they're detrimental, but what's going on in San Francisco right now, what's going on in, of course, the beautiful state of California, is literal fiscal freaking insanity. It's so insane that I never reported on it, or I may have briefly mentioned it, but I never did a fully fledged video on it because I just thought it was something so crazy. It was just some woke pipe dream that was being presented by some radical social Marxist revolutionary. I completely discredited almost immediately. But of course, California, when it comes to crazy, will always try to one-up itself and surprise you. And so this $5 million reparations plan, plus more, specifically targeting black residents in San Francisco, actually seems to be moving along. Something which seemed so completely unrealistic might really happen. And so of course, now we're forced to talk about it. We got some stuff to get into, so let's roll the tape. Alright folks, take a look at the headline. It speaks for itself. San Francisco leaders are showing early support for $5 million reparation payments for eligible black residents. A one-time payment of $5 million to each eligible black resident is among recommendations unanimously accepted by San Francisco's Board of Supervisors as part of a draft planned by a panel proposing reparations. The move Tuesday was an intermediate step, with a final report that includes board feedback due in June. The San Francisco African American Reparations Advisory Committee said, and the board is set to meet again on the issue in September. Now the real work continues. Supervisor Shaman Walton said, "As I've said before, we have to stay focused and stay together as a community because now it is 100% more prevalent that we cannot be separated or divided. Let's not lose focus because when we receive the final report, we have to actually resource the path forward." But now if you thought that the $5 million bulk sum payment to black San Francisco residents was crazy, it doesn't even paint the whole picture. San Francisco's reparations plan ripped for suggesting that black residents receive $97,000 a year for 250 years. A guaranteed income of nearly $100,000 a year. And on top of that, the elimination of personal debt and tax burdens. Now, there are so many different reasons why this policy is completely insane. Let's start off with the most obvious one, the basic financial and economic truths. This plan simply makes no sense. Based on initial analysis, depending on the eligibility criteria, of course, the cost of this reparations plan could go as high as $50 billion. You heard me right. Now, most likely it's not going to reach that, but it could. Theoretically, it could. And the cost of the program would essentially amount to around $500,000 to $600,000 per non-black resident. In other words, it's sound Democrat policy, spending money you don't have and spending money you can't afford, and then of course expecting the tax base to just foot the bill. Not to mention the cost would essentially be perpetual moving forward, because it's not just a $5 million per person lump sum payment, it's following up that payment with $100,000 a year guaranteed salary for 250 years forward. In other words, more debt and stacking on and piling on more debt after that, spending money you can't afford and running San Francisco into the ground into total bankruptcy. And the timing is just spectacular considering the tax base in San Francisco is fleeing at a record rate. They're already digging themselves a massive financial hole. In the billions, your response in this case should probably be to start cutting programs and being more fiscally responsible, but nope, their plan is $5 million reparation checks. The second element here is inflation. San Francisco is already totally unaffordable. Well, what happens when you inject essentially billions of dollars of phony government stimulus into your local economy? Sure, there's going to be a short-term boom, and I'm sure a lot of people are going to make a whole lot of money. Real estate agents are going to be having a field field day. I'm sure we're going to see record sales of PlayStation 5s and Xboxes, and 70-inch 4 or 8K TVs, whatever we're at this point in terms of resolution. I'm sure Mercedes and BMW, Bentley, Range Rover are going to sell more cars than they ever have in San Francisco. But then what do you think's going to happen? Inflation. Imagine the increase in cost of living, and especially the increases in terms of home affordability. It's not like San Francisco is building more homes. It's going to be just as restrictive as ever, except there's going to be 10 times more demand for multi-million-dollar properties, considering the government's going to be subsidizing these home purchases to black residents for $1. In other words, the home will be sold to black residents for $1, but really it's going to be sold at its actual asking cost. The only thing is that the government's going to pay for it. In other words, taxpayers are going to be buying homes for financially unqualified residents because racism. This makes absolutely no sense and is basically going to make every problem in California much worse. The idea that you could just throw money at a problem and end historic wrongs is so incredibly naive. It's so incredibly stupid. Probably why it's happening in California. The economics, the fiscal side of it, obviously it's completely freaking insane, and I probably don't need to over-explain it too much. What's doubly stupid about this whole thing is, I guess, the ahistorical socio-cultural element here. The first little factoid that a lot of people are bringing up, San Francisco is paying reparations to descendants of slaves, but if you look at the history of California, California never actually had slavery. Now, that's not to say that there wasn't discrimination. Of course, there was racial discrimination pretty much everywhere until, only however many decades ago. But San Francisco specifically is paying reparations for slavery when there was never any slavery in San Francisco. If the standard is opportunity discrimination, housing discrimination, then realistically, these reparations should go far beyond just targeting black Americans. California has a deep history of discrimination against the Chinese, and of course the Japanese, and probably many other racial groups and cultural groups as well. But for some reason, when it comes to woke ideology, any type of woke policy or policy of reparations, the blindfolds are put on the moment the topic of conversation focuses or mentions any group that isn't black Americans. This policy is just dumb, and it doesn't solve any problem. The only way to solve outcome disparities is by cleaning up neighborhoods. In California specifically, maybe not having the worst public school system in the nation, or at least one of the worst. Maybe policing communities so businesses could thrive in less affluent neighborhoods. Allowing a small percentage of black residents to move into homes that they can't afford without being subsidized over $100,000 a year in fake government salaries doesn't suddenly fix the bad neighborhood. There aren't enough fancy million-dollar homes in prestigious neighborhoods to move every black resident from less affluent neighborhoods into those environments. You're not actually solving the problem. The ghetto will still remain the ghetto, and it's going to produce the exact same outcomes that it has for the last however many generations. Not to mention, you can't just give somebody a multi-million-dollar home and expect everything to work. It costs a lot of money to maintain a home. There's a lot of costs when it comes to the maintenance of a house, which is why many people don't mind buying a condo, for instance. Sure, you pay condo fees. Some people think condo fees are so expensive, but in many cases, it's actually more expensive to own a home. When you pay the condo fee, the maintenance is all taken care of by the building management. You can't just give million-dollar homes away and expect racism BTFO'd. You can't give $5 million checks and expect racism BTFO'd. Even having $5 million doesn't necessarily guarantee an outcome. It's serious money, and in the right hands, you'll never have to work a day in your life, but in order to properly manage $5 million, you need to have a decent understanding of investment, a basic level of financial literacy. It's the very common phenomenon of not giving a man a fish, but rather teaching a man to fish. It's why we see megastar athletes, pop artists, and lottery winners going broke in situations where they probably shouldn't. Of course, the leftist response, you don't want to amend for slavery. You must not like black people. No, on the contrary. Excessive government handouts paid for by taxpayers solves nothing. You can't throw money and just throw your hands up in the air and say racism BTFO'd. You don't fix any of the actual core problems. And in fact, in the end, you're probably going to create more problems than you end up solving. The fact that people can't see that clearly truly baffles the mind. But you know what? We're already in full-on clown world, so my take at the end of this, go for it. It's San Francisco, it's California, who gives a shit? I mean, they're not going to listen anyways. If they want to experiment with this kind of radical social justice policy, then go for it. They're probably going to end up writing the book, creating the models, which will be forever etched in history as to why this kind of thing is simply a bad idea. Let them do it, let them have their little social experiment, and we'll just sit on the sidelines and see what happens. I don't think any law like this is going to pass, at least not in its current state, but it's very possible that something quite significant, massive payouts and long-term guaranteed government annual income does actually end up getting through, and so we'll follow it, and time will tell if it's sound fiscal policy. That's what I got for you guys on this one, though. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, make sure to leave a like and possibly subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.